You will be live soon. 4 seconds, 5 seconds. 88, 90%. You are live now. Okay, I'm gonna assume that everything is working appropriately and go ahead and put on my presentation. Can you all see the presentation?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna kick things off. My name is Carolina Fojo. I am the UX Research Manager for URBN. If you're not familiar with us, URBN is a set of global consumer brands. You may have heard of Urban Outfitters or Anthropologie. And today we're going to talk about our retail applications. And for context, when I talk about retail apps, I'm referring to the fact that we have stores. And in those stores, we have employees who leverage in-house apps that we've created to help them perform basic functions. An example of a basic function would be I'm in the store and I'm receiving a shipment of product and I need to keep track of what product has actually been received. Last year, the technology team at URBN re-platformed and redesigned 6 of those major apps, shifting from iOS over to Android. And today, we are going to talk about one feature of one of those apps that saved the company $200,000. We're going to talk about this, yes, because of the business impact, but also because the process we implemented for this project was so successful. Specifically, it was incredibly efficient and it was delightful for those of us who were involved. What made it that way was the fact that this truly was a cross-team collaboration throughout the entire product development process with lots of communication across team functions, and that process was grounded in research. And these two things led to an end result of a highly efficient process that kept us focused on optimization. We all were crystal clear about what the user needs were, and there was no time wasted in trying to develop features that were not going to ultimately have an impact on the end user. This in turn resulted in a product that saved thousands of hours by associates, and this directly translates to dollars saved by the business. It's because when you're in a store and you have a process that's going to take a certain amount of time, you have to allocate labor dollars for people to actually implement that process. So when you create an efficiency in the process, you're able to save labor dollars that you can allocate elsewhere. And last but not least, happy team members. I'm going to speak for all the folks who are going to be talking today and say that this was by far our favorite project that any of us participated in. And it was because of how closely we were able to collaborate across team functions to deliver something that really had an impact on our end user. So I'm going to kick things off and share a little bit about UX research, but then I'm going to pass it down the line. You're going to hear from everyone who was involved in actually building out this solution. And at the end, we would welcome any questions. So to dive in, we started off with UX research. We conducted what's called a contextual inquiry, which is basically a fancy word for conducting observations in a naturalized state. And what was so critical about our process was that not only did the research team go in to conduct the observations, but we also brought in everyone who was going to be essential in actually building out the solution. This was important because engineers, for example, are typically pretty far removed from the end user. And when an engineer is sitting there watching someone try to conduct a task that in theory should be so basic, but it's so difficult, it creates a lot of empathy and really motivates that engineer to come up with a creative solution to make that person's life just a little bit easier. So my team then went in and replicated the study to ensure the validity of our initial findings, but having all and actually see the user experience was really critical at the outset. So I'm going to walk us through the pain point that we identified to tee up the rest of the team to talk about the solution we ended up building. I want you to imagine that you work in a store, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, you're exhausted, and you're there to receive a shipment of new products. And those products come into the store in the form of cartons. They're boxes full of product, we call them cartons. And on any given day, you might receive anywhere from 50 cartons to 300 cartons. And as an associate, your job is to scan every single one of those cartons. And inevitably, if you're doing this day in and day out, at some point you're going to see what we call a discrepancy. Basically, there's the list of cartons that you expected to receive, and that may not 100% match the number of cartons or the list of cartons that are in front of you in your store. This can happen for any number of reasons. For example, maybe you received some cartons that were intended for a different store, but whatever the reason, you now have to report that discrepancy to headquarters. So your first step in reporting that discrepancy is you have to walk to your office, which seems super simple, but in some of our stores, the office is actually located 3 stories up from where those cartons would be received. And so when we think about time equaling money, you start to see those minutes and those dollars adding up. So you walk to your office, and then 2 managers have to sit there with 2 separate lists. One is the list of cartons we expected today, and one's the list of cartons we actually received. And those managers have to read through these 20-digit carton numbers one by one to identify where the discrepancy is. Again, you're starting to see those minutes adding up, but you're not done. Now you have to actually report that discrepancy. And you do that, you turn on your computer, you open up your email, you open up a new email, you manually type in that 20-digit carton number for any discrepancy, and you send that email to HQ. And oh, by the way, this is a footnote in the actual task that you are trying to accomplish. Your primary goal is simply to unpack those cartons and to get product out on the floor as soon as possible so that people can shop them later that day. This footnote adds anywhere from 5 to 25 minutes to the process. That's what we found in our research. And as I mentioned before, time equals money. So adding 5 to 25 minutes to the process and multiplying that across thousands of stores really starts to add up. In addition, this process is completely manual. You can imagine typing in that 20-digit carton number and having typos or missing a number, so it's highly error prone. In short, leaving us ripe with opportunity to make improvements. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to our product manager to talk about how they started solutioning.
Thank you, Carolina. Hey, everybody. My name is Alex. I was the product manager for this project. And after we went through all of that observation in the stores, my main goal was to figure out how we can address as many of these pain points as possible, and given our timeline, how we could address those with as little support as possible from our back-end services teams. So my biggest challenge was then documenting and prioritizing these findings while working with the design team and the engineering teams to come up with ways to address some of these situations in the client and with existing services that we already had. So basically what I was doing is I was taking some of these asks and observations that we identified, converting them into user stories so that we could clearly state each scenario and solution that we wanted to address. And then I worked with the UI and the app team. So I worked with Ray and Bueno to see how we could address these problems in a creative manner. And then I also took a look at our services, put my BA hat on, and took a look at what remote services we had available to us to then address these problems. So then once we had that identified, I then will pass it on to Ray to talk about the design process.
Thanks, Alex. And hi, everyone. I'm Ray. As a UX designer, my goal was to design a feature in the app that can help store associates report discrepancies faster and smarter. In order to achieve the goal, I had to solve 2 specific design challenges. The first one was how may we help store associates quickly identify discrepancies. Before, the associates need to compare a list of carton numbers included on the delivery receipt against a list of carton numbers they've scanned into the app. What's challenging here is that the 2 lists are by different orders. The carton numbers listed on the receipt are by numeric order, whereas the numbers in the app are by the time when the carton was scanned. When the associates compare the list, they usually grab a carton number in the app and then try to see if that number also exists on the receipt. If it does, then that carton is acknowledged and is fine. If it doesn't, that carton is unexpected, and that's one discrepancy they have to report. You can imagine how cumbersome the process is and how much extra time it can take. Remember, in stores, time equals money. So in order to solve the challenge, I came up with a solution where we can ask the app to automatically capture the unexpected cartons for the associates while they scan cartons to acknowledge the shipment. The unexpected cartons are highlighted in a different color and are labeled as invalid, which is the term the associates use when they refer to unexpected cartons. When I design, I try to let my design speak a user's language, so it's easier for users to learn and remember how the interface works. This also helps to build an experience that feels intuitive for the users. I also designed a footer to show a detailed carton count breakdown so that the associate can see at a glance the total number of invalid cartons they need to report. They can also compare the acknowledged carton count to the total number of cases shipped shown on the receipt to quickly check if they acknowledge all the cartons they're supposed to receive. Once the discrepancies are identified, the second challenge is how may we help store associates quickly report these discrepancies. Before, they need to write down the invalid carton numbers on a piece of paper, then walk to the office where the computer is located, log into computer, log into email, type out the 20-digit carton numbers, and then send the email to headquarters. It takes time and effort to go through all these steps to report discrepancies. It's also very easy to make errors since they need to manually write down and then type out the long carton numbers. Now with the new app, once the associates scan all the cartons they received, they can tap on the complete acknowledgement button. Then they can see a list of invalid cartons in the report discrepancy view. They can double check on the numbers. If everything looks good, they can tap on the report discrepancy button at the bottom, which will make the app emails headquarters with the list of discrepancies. As you can see, before the associates need to go through so many steps, now they just need to tap on 2 buttons. This new feature saves tons of time for the associates and also lots of money for the company. Now I'll hand over to Bueno, who will talk about the engineering part of the project.
Thanks so much, Ray. So at this point, we've gone through UX research. We've done our research into our available technologies, and we've designed up a solution. And now it comes time to look at that design solution and see how we achieve that engineering-wise. What you should have gleaned from the previous parts of the presentation is that there are 2 real challenges here. One was to integrate the process of notifying our main office about discrepancies. And the other was to do with the fact that our remote services don't support invalid cartons. The first of these 2 was relatively simple to solve, in that we were given a service that we could pass the list up to from the app, eliminating the need for the associate to go upstairs and send the email. The more complex part of this was that we weren't able to get support from our service team at this time to persist invalid cartons. So if you want to go to our next slide. There were a few options for this. The main challenge was having a single source of truth for both valid and invalid cartons. One option to do this would be to take our views that you see laid out here and pass a list stored in local memory of the Android device across the 3 views. This is very cumbersome and open to a lot of errors. Another issue that we soon learned about, I'm a iOS engineer coming into Android, is that due to the fact that Android has a lot of various form factors and different price points and performance levels for their device, they are much more strict about how much information is allowed to be stored in local memory, meaning that various lifecycle events in the application can wipe the local memory if you don't specifically make note for it to be set aside. So this really wasn't preferable to us. If you advance to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about our solution. A product that's pretty commonly used in Android to resolve this issue is called Room. It's a wrapper around the Android SQLite interface, and it interfaces very well with a design pattern known as MVVM. In MVVM, you decouple the various logic parts of the app so that each part of the pattern has its own job. You're going to have a view where the user is seeing the information laid out. That view should be relatively dumb, for lack of a better term. It shouldn't have a lot of heavy app logic on it. The next level up you see is a view model. The view model is a specific class that can contain observable properties that a view can listen to. And as you're doing logic, you're going to update these properties, thereby updating the UI for the user. The part of this that sadly gets left out of the abbreviation for some reason is the repository. The repository is one of the most powerful parts where you tie together your data persistence layer. The repository can contain networking code as well as local storage code. Both of these things are very similar in that they are asynchronous operations, because you might in some cases be reaching out to an API to fetch data for your single source of truth, or you might be using a local SQLite database to store your single source of truth. Both of these have to happen on a background thread because these operations take time. And often we tie the two of them together. In this case, we would be fetching valid cartons from our service, which supports valid carton persistence, and we would be adding those to the local database. And then as the users scan invalid cartons, we would add those to our local database as well, so we can persist that data set across the app. And if you advance to the next slide, you'll see our more preferred, where each view is just passing these lists of cartons to the local storage where it's being persisted. And in each view, based on requirements, we can fetch data with basically SQL queries. So, you know, in the first view, we're looking at valid and invalid cartons. So the SQL query would be to view all. In the second view, we're only interested in invalid cartons that we're going to send in an email to our merge control. And we're just going to select based on the valid or invalid Boolean, and we're going to only fetch invalid cartons. And in the last, we can use various other SQL statements to just show a summary of the acknowledgement when the associate gets to the end of the process. One nice advantage of this as well is that it's very scalable. In the future, when our service gets some cycles to persist our invalid cartons, it's going to be very easy for us to remove the local storage part of this and just pass those invalid cartons up via service. So it's very scalable and it won't take a lot of engineering lift at that time. I breezed over this pretty quickly, so I'd encourage anyone to ask questions as you have them. But for now, I hand this off to our product manager. Sorry, I'm not using your title correctly, Debbie. What? Totally blanking.
Project manager.
Yes, project manager. Sorry. Who's going to talk about how she basically kept us all in line through this process. So passing you up to you, Debbie.
Hi, everyone. As Bueno mentioned, my name is Debbie. And my goal as a project manager was to deliver a high impact project that was on time, provided value to the stores while also maintaining a happy project team. So this team really came together specifically for this initiative. So with that, there were obviously challenges that we faced as a newly formed team. There were really a lot of firsts that were happening. It was the first time some of us were working together, first time leads. Our engineers were learning a new programming language with Kotlin, while our designer was learning material design. There was also new hardware that we had to learn how to use. So in order to minimize the potential issues that come with a young team, the way that I approached it was really through just good communication, honestly. We made sure that we were sharing ideas early in the process from design to integration. Ray would show us her comps, what she was thinking, how she was thinking about approaching certain features, and we would get feedback on, does this add additional scope, how difficult or how easy it was to build something like this. We also were making sure we were providing visibility across the board through status reporting and one-on-one check-ins to build that rapport. We also had, when we were in the office, flexible workspaces. So for instance, I didn't necessarily sit with the engineering team, but I made sure that I was available to them. I would go and I would sit in their pod and just be there to answer any questions or to quickly think through solutions to anything that came up that we needed to resolve. Next slide, please. So the success of the project was really based on how efficiently we were communicating. That effective communication led to relationship building and collaboration, ensuring that we were all working towards the same end result. Next slide, please. So as a result of us aligning on that goal, there were huge business impacts and also team impacts. We had increased accuracy with reporting from our stores to our merge control team. There was saved time and money. As a team, we had a clear and focused goal. So that meant that we were spending our time efficiently and on the right things. So in the end, we were able to deliver 6 new applications to our stores in about a year and a half with a happy project team still intact, which I believe was a huge success for us. Next slide. So thank you to everyone involved at URBN who helped support this project, and to all of you for allowing us to present today. So with that being said, we're now open for any questions you may have. And if you could please, when you submit questions, just identify who the question is for, that'd be great. Thank you, guys.
I can see that Helen has already asked a question in the chat about how the discrepancies are handled when the expected cartons don't arrive. And I can say that that is something that Ray and I are working to address in the application currently. We're trying to get that in for a release later this year. But just from my personal thought process for this was what's the easiest thing that we can address first and see how it's being used, and then kind of build it out from there. And we realized that, I think it was somewhere over 9,000 of these discrepancy emails have been sent since we released this. So obviously they're using it, and now we just want to expand into all of the use cases that we've identified for any kind of discrepancy reporting.
I'm seeing another question from Chris. I'm always interested in how teams split product and engineering. Curious about the intersection here. Who wants to take that? Silence. Silence, team. I'll speak really broadly, and then if anyone else wants to chime in. So we have UX, including UX research and UX design, and product, and we're all technically on one team, and then engineering. Recently, we've had a merger where all the teams are aligned now, which is really helpful. But when this project was happening, they were technically on different teams. And so that's part of why this project was so successful, is that we were communicating in a way that we weren't always able to with other projects. So that was the bifurcation there. But again, working really closely together here made a huge, huge, huge difference. I see a question from Cody. When I'm assuming it's for you.
Yeah, the question was, did you use a single activity multi-fragment architecture? I typed it for a, yeah, I'll address that. That was the pattern we went with, where we had one single main activity that handles the transactions between fragments. And if there's any data that needs to be persisted across all fragments, it can act as a orchestration for that. And then our individual fragments are passed on by user actions, and each fragment for each part of that flow has its own view model that communicates with inventories to kind of keep the view logic for those fragments specific to the view models that are associated with them.
Best to see that Greg has asked a question about migrating everyone to Android, and then how that affected the UI. So I'll take the first half of that question. It was kind of a staggered rollout. So all of these applications existed on the iOS devices in the stores before we started this project, and we kind of released them one at a time. So they were coexisting. We did work with the IT store teams to really, and the brand ops teams to really hammer home the point that they should be using the Android apps whenever they're available. But now that all of the applications have been released, they are slowly pulling those iOS devices off the floors in our stores. Ray, if you want to address the UX part of that question.
Yeah, so how did you adjust making the two UX similar? First of all, we try to maintain the basic functionality. That stay the same, like they have to scan the cartons to acknowledge, the basic tasks are the same. And then I try to identify specific patterns with the LS design and try to use similar patterns, try to find the similar patterns with the material guideline, and just try to use that, maintain that same pattern. So it's the app still feels familiar for the users. For example, as you can see, I have the screen to show the old app, the color, the primary color is like orange, and also like the list of carton numbers that push cell, like it's like quite similar to the current new design, to just try to like identify the similar patterns and use that to make the experience also new experience familiar to our users.
The other thing I'll add on to this is that we did do this in a pilot approach. So we piloted the new apps in some stores and were able to get feedback immediately and respond to that, which also helped on many fronts in terms of technological issues, UX, etc. Last question maybe I'll time for from Julian, and Debbie, maybe I'll put this to you. Were there challenges working cross-team? Like, were there gaps in responsibilities that required behind-the-scenes work? Any lessons on how to do that fairly? I have found that difficult before.
I would say there were gaps on our end. For instance, Alex kind of touched on that earlier. Because we didn't have a dedicated BA, there was a lot of the technical requirements chasing that he and I had to do. So even though he is the product owner, he really put on that technical hat and really chased those services integrations and any data points that we needed with the existing services that we had, right? One thing he mentioned was we needed to be able to deliver these products without much interruption to the current roadmap for our services team. So we really had to dig into the existing services and figure out what can we use, what can't we reuse, and kind of identify that. The good thing is that I'll speak for myself. I really like that technical part of my job. So that was something that I embraced. Alex, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think one thing that we were really lucky to have on this team is it really did feel like you know, all the puzzle pieces really fit together in terms of everybody's skill set and, you know, things that they really enjoyed doing. So like Debbie was saying, both of us really did enjoy tracking down all of that technical, the services that we had available. And I really liked being able to try and piece together in my head how we can utilize what we already had and make that work for what, you know, what scenarios we wanted to address in the application. So I think we got really lucky with the team structure in that way.
The other thing I'll add in here is, again, that communication piece. And Debbie mentioned how we were a new team and a lot of us hadn't worked together before. And so early on, just being over-inclusive and capturing everyone in that process, that enabled us to get to know each other, get to know each other's strengths and know who needed to be pulled in when. But erring on the side of over-communication, especially for a new team, was incredibly helpful.
I've learned in the world of retail is you can never over communicate.
I think that's it, and we're just at about time. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much to the URBN team. Thank you. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm technically managing editor Julie Zeiglin here to close out this session. And thank you to everybody who's been in the chat and who's been watching. This is, of course, the Technically Developers Conference. And now for the next hour and 20 minutes, we have our jobs fair over in, I believe, the expo section. If you go back to the main event page, the lobby, you'll be able to see and join that. So thank you, everyone. Go try to get a job or just meet some new companies. So thanks, everyone. Thanks again for your presentation.
Thank you.